koutou. Ara kaya kunui kaya kurahi. Ka toko ake rā te mātāpuno te ori tōna manua ua tau. Ka marara tarau wa taki ko ngā purapura whetu he koro wai ahuru mōna irunga. I kākaungia i tōna koi awi te wauhua tau. Horohia rā te takapau whare nui ko wai keiro te whare nei. Ko ngā uri o hine te iwa iwa. Ko ngā uri o hine te iwa iwa o hine ahuane o hine korito. O hine te rehia e rarau mai nei tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou katoa e ngā raurangatira mā, e ngā mārei kura i ngā watu kura ara mai nei. Ki te tautoko, tēnei rā nunui. Kei tōku taha matau, ara te mātāpuno o te ora. Ara, ko tēnei tipua, Catherine Sheppard, ko tēnei tipua a mera manga kāhia. Nā raua i tīmata tēnei hiko i ki hai i mutu. E ngā tau ko tahi rau, rua te kau, māri ma ngā tau e pāhuri ake nei. O tia nora tau rawe ake anō mai te timatanga, taire ake no e hara i te mutunga. E hara i te mutunga ki tō tātou pirimia o Aotearoa, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern. Koe anōra, nei rā te mihi ki o koutou mema o te whare mata nei, Joe Hayes, Louisa Wall. Nā rāua i whātora atu rā, te whatituka mā koutou hara mai, ki te whakarongo ki e nei tipua, ki e nei tawhito, ki e nei taniwha. Ki e nei taniwha e kōrero hi e nei ki o koutou, e pāna ki o rātou haerenga. Nō reira tēnā koutou. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this wonderful occasion to help celebrate the state of our wahine in terms of the 150th anniversary of women's suffrage. And we've had a wonderful morning this morning, and this leads on to this occasion, which will follow another one. I'd just like to welcome you all here today to listen to these wonderful ladies who are about to share their thoughts with each and every one of you and us in part of their journey. Ki te whawhai atu rā, mo ake tonu atu te huarahi o ngā mana wahine. Nō reira e ngā raurangatira mā, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
E honore,
E karoria, mangarongo ki te whenua, whakaro, ai e, ki ngā tangata katoa, ake It's always pleasing to hear ngā manu ohine waiata ki te tautoko te reo o tamakōrero. O tino, ladies and gentlemen, amongst every one of you there is a leader. And amongst every one of us we've had a leader, and she's known as Mum. And if it wasn't for our mothers, the leaders that they were, we would not be here in the positions that these lovely people, and like yourselves, are here today. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe kura. Ka nuiti mihi atu ki a koutou katoa e ngā mana wahine e wahine toa, nau mai, haere mai. I'm really pleased to be opening the panel, the State of the Nation, Nation of Women in New Zealand, panel today. I'm really rapt because I'm the co-chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, along with my co-chair, Louisa Wall, and we are really pleased and humbled that all of you have come here today to listen to this beautiful lineup of this beautiful wahine tour sitting on our stage today. Our day has started with a breakfast this morning whereby we were all given, all the MPs, women MPs were given one of these, the camellia. It's a ceramic camellia. And on the back of our camellia is our number and our position as we came into Parliament. And so this year, as we celebrate the 125th anniversary of women's suffrage, I am the 125th woman MP to come to Parliament. Wow. So I'm not going to take up too much of your time because we need to listen to our beautiful wahine on my left. All I need to say is I need to put in an early apology. I have to leave to go to the Manawatu District Council. I have been awarded a women's suffrage award tonight, so I have to be up there and we need to get ahead of the traffic, otherwise we're going to be late for our own ceremony. So anyway, without any further ado, I want to acknowledge Dr. Jackie Blue, who is going to be our panellist moderator. I want to acknowledge our beautiful wahine tour sitting over there, Natalia Elbert, Dr. Gill, Greer, Prue, Kapua, Laura Rapiri, O'Connell Rapiri, Bernadette Pereira, Farida, Sultana, and Helen, Swales. So without any further ado, I hand the baton over to our dear friend, the Dr. Jackie Blue, and I wish you all very well and thank you very much for coming. Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou katoa. I'd like to thank Louisa Wall and Joe Hayes for organising, and the Commonwealth Parliamentarians for organising this panel. 2018 marks the 125th anniversary of women's suffrage in New Zealand. On the 19th of September 1893, the Electoral Act 1893 was passed, giving all women in New Zealand the right to vote. As a result of this landmark legislation, New Zealand became the first self-governing country in the world in which all women had the right to vote in parliamentary elections. Tonight we will be examining the progress that women in New Zealand have made, and we will be hearing from 7 female leaders on where they feel progress has been made, where it has stalled, and where it may have regressed. The end game, of course, is that we all live in a gender-equal world. Will this happen in my lifetime, my children's lifetime, or my grandchildren's lifetime? Time will tell, but it will be a world worth fighting for. As Sheryl Sandberg said, it will be a world where women are seen as leaders and men as nurturers. It will be a world where half our businesses are run by women and half our homes are run by men. Men will do their fair share of unpaid and caring work willingly, and family-friendly workplaces will be the norm. Diversity will be celebrated. Workers will be able to bring all themselves to work and not have to pretend to be something that they are not, which is not sustainable and exhausting. There will be true pay equity, where women are paid 100% what they are worth. It will be a rapidly advancing the world because the other half of the population will be able to contribute. Because women want peace, not war, women will be at the forefront of conflict resolution and peace negotiations. We will have parliaments that work on consensus and not conflict. And I was in the House this afternoon, and the Prime Minister led off the General Suffrage 125 debate. And she said, basically, to attract enough women to make 50% women MPs, Parliament needs to evolve, and I totally agree with her. It will be a world when a woman walks into a job interview, there is an intuitive understanding that she brings with her the expertise that she has acquired through being the CEO of her family, and the skill set she brings is unique and sought after. It's definitely a world worth fighting for, but we do have significant challenges, and I know the panel will address these, and I won't enlarge with any great detail, but they are domestic and sexual violence, including sexual harassment. We need pay equity for women, which is not that far away, but also from women in mixed occupations. We must tackle the negative gender stereotypes and unconscious bias of women that persists, and there must be equal representation of women in decision-making roles. So let's have that discussion on temporary special measures and that Q word, quotas. Finally, we must be inclusive of all women, and that includes trans and gender diverse women. The format will be that each of the panellists in alphabetical order will have 7 minutes to talk, and then we'll throw open questions to the audience and finish at 5:30, where Louisa Wall will conclude, and she has a little gift to give to our panellists this afternoon. So, without any further ado, I'd like to ask Natalia Elbert to come to the podium. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hi, everybody. I'm a little nervous, so just bear with. I have a very polished script here that I will stick to. It is a privilege and an honor to be in this venue with you, this panel, today. I acknowledge everyone here, and I thank you for coming to celebrate this occasion with us. I was raised in Mexico in the 80s by a single working mother. There was no way I wasn't going to be a feminist. I saw firsthand the resilience required to succeed as a woman in a country infamous for its macho culture and staunch Roman Catholic beliefs about tradition, families, heterosexuality, gender roles, and the price one paid when not abide. I have also been an immigrant in 4 countries at different times in my life. I have been a Mexican in Canada, a Mexican in the States, a Mexican in Spain, and a Mexican in New Zealand. I have moved countries more than 10 times and never lived in one for more than 4 years, except for now, which is my longest streak for 7 in New Zealand. Turns out my mother pushed through that glass ceiling so hard and with such fury that she became a very successful Mexican diplomat. And I was privileged enough to benefit from her sacrifice, discipline, and ferociousness. So, I would like to think of myself as an expert immigrant. I have been one since I was 4. I am very proud of it, and I wear this belief on my sleeve. I strongly believe in being a responsible immigrant and learning the language to the best of our abilities, working hard to integrate culturally, intellectually, and emotionally with a host country. Get to know the nuances of your host nation. I also believe in kindness, inclusivity, and investing time in doing this with everybody, whether you're an immigrant or not. I arrived in New Zealand in 2011, and the biggest shock wasn't the weather. Surprising. It was that even though my English, confidence, and experience should be good enough to find a job that suited my skills, it was not. I was told I had to retrain and start again. So I did. Diligently went through the salary bands, started at $32K a year. I have that letter on my desk. It was my first letter of offer, and it meant the world to me. It wasn't the job I necessarily wanted or wanted to do for 40 hours a week, but it was a start. I did a second, once I got my New Zealand residency 2 years later, I started a bachelor's. Again, my second one. And I also started a non-profit to prove to the Wellingtonian market that I could do more than the entry-level jobs I was offered. It began out of a need to survive, an unwaverly desire to make it and not have to go back to Mexico City, which was going through the worst violent and criminal wave in history. 7 years later, this has turned into a lifestyle, and I can say I feel I did it. I won. I made it. This journey was hard, and I was privileged enough to have a loving, supportive Kiwi partner that had a loving and caring, gorgeous family that took me in as one of their own. They helped me navigate this country and this culture, and they helped me to keep swimming. But some female immigrants from places such as Colombia, Madagascar, Nairobi, India, China, aren't so privileged. The not-for-profit I founded is called Kate Sheppard Place Women. And its vision is to make all decisions with inclusivity and intersectionality at its core. I left my third page on the printer. So I'm now going to wing it. And now it's going to be really funny. because that's my story, which is great. But now I'm going to talk to you about this. Because this I do in a voluntary capacity. I also have a day job, and today was manic. So, having said that, I'm just going to tell you for the next 2 or 3 minutes about Sheppard Place Women. This is our new image for 2019. We will run this event in March, and I'm very proud of this nonprofit. Like I said, it started out as a need to just prove that I could do something out of the box, so I started something called the Wellington Women Walking Project. I turned my personal blog into a website, and I created a Facebook page, and I managed to get 40 women to walk 100 Ks and fundraise $40,000 for Oxfam New Zealand. That got me to the 50K a year band from the 30K a year band. While I was still working and studying full-time, I brought the first TEDx Women event to New Zealand, again, out of sheer desire to do something that wasn't exhausting as walking. I was like, I need something a bit easier than this shit. This is, I can't, because there's no way. So I worked with TEDx Women for 3 years, and I brought TEDx, my first TEDx event was TEDx Homebush Road Women, which is my address. I live on Homebush Road in Kandala. My second event was TEDx Wellington Women. And my third event, which didn't eventuate, but I got the license for, was TEDx Sheppard Place Women. And Sheppard Place is a street here, 2 blocks away in the National Library. Then I got into a bit of a beef with TEDx, because turns out that running a gendered event under a massive global American brand, let's just say it didn't align with my values. So I dumped them. And I have Christy in the audience that helped me navigate that very sour moment where I decided that they were no longer going to be a part of my life. And she was key in me just keep going and keep working on this. So what we do in Sheppard Place Women is we prioritize minority groups, gendered focus. So trans women, disabled women, immigrant women, women of color, all the rainbow community and gender diverse. People are who we prioritize, so we give them 15 minutes to tell their story. We curate the speakers, we give them a platform, we put an audience in front of them in a beautiful venue, and we invite people to be exposed to these stories and to hear them, because you don't hear them or see them in mainstream media, C-suite roles, top tables. That was part of my speech, I remember this. Novels, storylines, movies, authors. There's no visibility for a lot of these groups, and I wish with Sheppard Place Women to provide that platform and start those conversations, because it's not all about the event. The event's the excuse. It's the journey the team goes through, the volunteers go through to get the community on board with this mission and this kaupapa. And I'm very proud of it. And that's my spiel. I have no idea how long this went for. I hope this was all right. Kia ora tātou.
You're a gifted speaker, Natalia. You should leave your pages on the printer more often. No, truly. And you're obviously a real go-getter, so good for you. I would now like to ask Dr. Gill Greer to come to the podium.
Kia ora, and thank you very much indeed, Jackie. I'd like to acknowledge the people of the land and the journeys of their forefathers and foremothers, and acknowledge the journeys of the forefathers and foremothers of all of you in this room that have brought us all to this place today, at this moment, for this mahi. 125 years ago, just down the road, this was pasted onto the wall of a Wellington house. Many of you will know it. It reads, "Electioneering women are requested not to call here. They are recommended to go home, look after their children, cook their husband's dinner, empty the slops, and generally attend to the domestic affairs for which nature intended them. By taking this advice, they will earn the respect of all right-minded people, an end not to be attained by unsexing themselves and meddling in masculine concerns of which they are profoundly ignorant." And here in this very house, well, just next door, one parliamentarian said, "It can't be questioned. There is no doubt that women have neither the moral nor the physical capacity to be able to vote." And a Maori member of parliament said, there is a concern that attractive women could be a distraction for members of Parliament. I, for one, would not be allowed by my wife back into this house should there be attractive ladies here in case my eyes should stray. So have we progressed since then? Yes. And if we think more recently, in 1971, Prime Minister Robert Muldoon said, so this is 50 years ago, could we contemplate the situation where a woman who is the main breadwinner works full-time and her husband stays home and looks after the children? I don't think so. So some years later, we have a Prime Minister who could prove him wrong very clearly, and many other women as well. I'm often asked, so what has New Zealand done since for women? And sometimes I find it difficult to answer. We live longer and we have fewer children, and those two are probably connected, as those of you who are acquainted with family planning, which is where I used to work, would know. But nevertheless, do we teach sexuality and relationship education and consent education? Well, no better than we did some years ago. And will we all, in fact, live longer? I, with any luck, will live to 83, and some of you will live longer. But Maori women today will only live to 77 on average, and Pacifica women to 79. And time again, we make the mistake still of treating all women as if we are the same. Not taking into account intersectionality, for example, multiple disadvantage. So I went to hear stats the other day, and they are doing fantastic work. And 80 NGOs were in the room because they wanted to know if their issue was going to be included in the new statistics. Governments, I always say, talk collaboration and they fund competition. And if you look, you'll see that's often the truth. So there is an indicator for women. For my organisation, the National Council of Women Leading Gender Equal, we're working on, with stats help, a gender dashboard so that we'll be able to fill in the rest of the detail, the disaggregated data, the age, the ethnicity, how much disability impacts on ability to do the same things, have equal opportunity. Kate Sheppard herself said, all that separates, whether of race, class, creed, or sex, is inhuman and must be overcome. So it's extraordinary, really, that after 122 years, this organisation set up to be the Women's Parliament actually followed her line, having done some research and realised that gender equality is in fact something that all people deserve across the gender spectrum, and that men and others are as disadvantaged by the stereotypes that keep us in our boxes. So again, she talked about humanity and humanity mattering more than womanhood. And that's important to keep in mind. People often ask me, why was it that it was New Zealand women that won the vote for the first time? There's a lot of reasons. Part of it was probably because so many of the settlers who came here, while they in fact did not behave well in terms of the Maori indigenous people, as they didn't around the world, were nevertheless determined that Jack should be as good as his master and Gill as good as her mistress. In other words, they dreamt of a fair and equal society, a classless one. And we haven't really succeeded in that because we have such dramatic differences between different groups within our society. But it was a goal, and one that we need to think about, because we need to think how we can build a society that is truly gender equal, that recognises difference, but recognises that in every small town, country, office, farm, institution are people who deserve equal rights, equal human rights, who deserve to be treated with respect, with dignity. They did. When they founded this parliament, the Labour government, for example, when it began in parliament, wanted a fair go for all, equality for all, and that has to be our dream. We've carried out a survey, and I'll just give you a few highlights very quickly. In this survey, the first of its kind in New Zealand, which does exactly what the UN wanted the government to do, 85% of New Zealanders believe household tasks should be shared. That's great. That's progress. But you'll be interested that men believe that the bathroom, nevertheless, is women's work. It also tells us more seriously that 29% of New Zealanders believe that there are false rape claims and that they are common. It tells us that 15% of New Zealanders believe that when someone is raped, they are at least partly responsible. And I believe that we are in the middle of a preventable pandemic of violence, and that this government should do as the UN has said and have a properly funded national action plan that will deal with pay equity, with a range of issues related to women's visibility in the media, and most of all, with domestic and sexual violence. Its impact is intergenerational. It impacts on the health system, on mental health, on people's health. It impacts on productivity, and if we have to use this argument, it impacts on economics. That has to change. We will never have gender equality until it comes. And at the same time, let's remind ourselves, 20% of New Zealanders believe it's more important for men to have power than women. And until we change that, we will not get rid of the reasons that drive violence and inequality. If we were a developing country, and parts of it might just as well be, we would say, if we were the World Bank or New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, invest in women. They will lift the country day after day. It's time we did the same. It's time we came together as NGOs, put some of the past differences behind us, look at what we have in common, and say, let's just not talk here for 125 years of progress. Let's not just talk about it. Let's start a new age in which we find common ground, stand tall, and help the government to deliver more than 50 recommendations that have come from the UN. Kia ora tātou, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Gill. That was tremendous. I'd like to now invite Prue Kapua to come to the podium. Thank you, Prue.
Tuatahi e kura a ngā mihi ki a koe mō tō reo pōwhiri kia mātou. I ngā wāhine, i ngā tāne, e huhu mai nei i tēnei rā motuhaki ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou. Now this topic, I guess, is probably framed to discuss progress. But I guess from my perspective from the outset, for Māori women, we've come from a position of greater equality within our traditional society to one of increased marginalisation and almost invisibility. An understanding of pre-colonised Māori society points to more complementary roles of men and women. There were distinct roles, but they were not mutually exclusive and not regarded as hierarchical. Our history and our traditions were full of stories of strong, powerful women. Our language was gender neutral. No one can say there was no sexism, but certainly the power structures and the hierarchies existed, but they were more likely to be based on whakapapa rather than gender per se. And that structure was entirely changed by colonisation and Christianity. Colonisation disrupted the balance between mana wāhine, mana whenua, mana whānau, and mana atua. And our experience is not so different from other Indigenous people throughout the world, who have essentially been displaced from their lands and deprived of their knowledge or mātauranga. There is often a greater commonality for us with Indigenous women from other countries than sometimes with our Pākehā feminist sisters. And that's because of our different starting point. The historical, present, and future impact of colonisation. and so to our state today. The first thing I want to raise is that we need to do better at recognising the role Māori women had to play in a journey that encompasses more than suffrage. The paving of the bill in 1893 is significant, a paving of the bill and the passing of the bill, but so too was the motion of Mere Te Taimanga Kahia earlier that year. And that requires a wider appreciation of structures, not just those imposed by colonisation. For Māori, Te Kotahitanga was established to present tribal grievances to government and to protect rights under the Treaty of Waitangi. While it was a Māori initiative, it was modelled on the New Zealand Parliament of the day, with a lower house of 96 elected members and an upper house of 50 members. What is significant is that from the outset, women could speak where they were given authority by their iwi. And that happened. Mere's petition was not only for women to vote in Te Kotahitanga, but also to stand. While the motion did not proceed after 2 days, women involved in Te Kotahitanga went about organising themselves into ngā komiti wahine and dealt with a myriad of issues facing Māori women and their whānau, issues that are not dissimilar to those faced today. Some of the topics were ones not so easily spoken about by Pākehā women at the time. They were issues such as domestic violence, smoking, promiscuity, support for solo mothers. Much of the communication was by paper, and one of the papers was owned by a woman called Niniwa Itirangi. She was a supporter and friend of Mere Te Taimanga Kahia and an ardent land activist. In actual fact, her whāngai daughter, Mata Hirini, was the president of the Māori Women's Welfare League from 1960. In 1897, 4 years after Mere presented her petition, Māori women won the right to vote and to stand for the Māori Parliament. The Māori Parliament, however, dissolved in 1902, following the passing of the Māori Councils Act in 1900, which essentially was to take over the role of Te Kotahitanga. This was a Māori initiative that became subsumed with government processes. And so we look to what has happened since 1893. Although it's not generally referred to, a number of Māori women were involved in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Women like Hene Pore, Sophie Te Paia Henerangi, Hedda Sterling all joined the Women's Christian Temperance Union by 1897, and Hedda Sterling in fact set up the Māori department of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, with the first Māori convention being held in 1911. While the Women's Parliamentary Rights Act gave women the right to stand for Parliament in 1919, we know Elizabeth Macomb became the first female Member of Parliament in 1933, albeit for less than 2 years. But we don't hear much about Rehutai Maihi, who was the first Māori woman to contest a seat in 1935. When Iriaka Ratana became the first Māori woman to win a seat in Parliament, she won against another Māori woman, Katarina Nutana. Many of you may not know that Whenekupa, in fact, stood in Northern Māori in the Northern Māori by-election in 1963 as an independent when it was won by Matu Rata. So Māori women have been active, if not less visible, participants since 1893. But by 1993, 100 years later, we had only had 3 women win seats: Iriaka, Whetu Tirakatini Sullivan and Sandra Lee. But what we have seen since 1893, and more so in the last 35 years, has been a reclamation and decolonisation process. We've gone through that process and are going through that process as Māori women. There's a greater openness and discussion about our identities as women and as Māori, the intersectionality. They cannot be considered in isolation, and that there are multiple oppressions to be dealt with: sexism, racism, colonisation, and sometimes others like homophobia as well. Understanding that is essentially to understand that as Māori women, we sometimes have to distance ourselves from Pākehā men and women and Māori men. And so we see the emergence of mana wahine as a means to describe Māori women's lived realities today, but also the lived experience of generations of Māori women. Mana wahine is about us understanding our place in the world on our own terms, and our connectedness to others is where our experiences are acknowledged and we are supported in the processes that we need to go through. We are in the process of reclaiming our knowledge, our history, our wairua, our whānau basis. At the same time, we need to question where we have seen the co-opting of patriarchal and colonial ideologies into our own tikanga. Practices that continue to marginalise and oppress Māori women under an umbrella of tradition need to be challenged. We want our past and women's history included. We want support in our need to reclaim our history and our knowledge and deal with deconstructing those state ideologies, policies and practices. And we want to continue our claim under the treaty before the Waitangi Tribunal, where mana wahine has not been protected by political dealings. We need to remedy exclusionary practices of the Crown which inhibit and prevent our participation in decision-making. And we need to stop talking about women on boards within a narrow focus. And that focus is of imposed structures. We need to celebrate Māori women leaders in iwi organisations, such as the new Māori trustee just announced. We need to celebrate women sitting on rugby boards. We need to celebrate Māori women coaching national teams. There is still some way to go. Mana wahine is about recognising the authority, dignity and power of Māori women. It's about making visible our narratives and experiences, diverse as they may be, of Māori women. And I'd like to end with a quote from Dame Metazazi, a past president of the Māori Women's Welfare League, who said, "Me aro ki te hā o te hini ahuone, pay heed to the dignity of women." Kia ora.
Thank you, Prue. A really powerful address. I'd now like to ask Laura O'Connell-Rapira to come to the podium. Thank you, Laura.
Kia ora tātou. I was told it was 10 minutes, so I apologise. I will try and keep it short. And I was also invited to give a young people's perspective, and then I wrote back to Charlotte, I'm 30, like next month, is that still young? And then she told me that in parliamentary terms, under 45 is young, so kia ora all the young people. So I have the enormous privilege and responsibility of being the director at ActionStation. And for those of you who don't know ActionStation, we use the internet to organise large and sometimes quite small groups of people to take coordinated action for a fair and flourishing Aotearoa. We are non-partisan, but we are not apolitical, which means that we organise around policies and issues and values, but not around political parties. And for 90% of the campaigns that we do, we try to collaborate with someone who has lived experience of the issue, with people who are researchers on the issue, or with service providers who often are busy doing the mahi of delivering their services and don't have the space to advocate for what it is that they need to actually deliver those services better for the people they serve. Fortunately, even though I was invited here to give a young people's perspective, I do actually have 1,000 young people's perspectives, if you can imagine that behind me, because recently we were approached by Arataiohi, which is the peak body for youth development in New Zealand, to conduct research on young people's perspectives of wellbeing. And so between the 20th of July and the 7th of August, we gathered the views of more than 1,000 young people aged 12 to 24, interviewed a handful of youth workers and policy experts in this space, and we asked them, what does youth wellbeing look like to you? We gathered those insights through 3 different ways: an online survey which had 28 questions, 12 interviews with, like I said, a diverse range of people who work with young people, and 16 workshops that we ran at Festival for the Future, which was here in Wellington in July. Now, of the methods of engagement that we use to hear from young people, we have the most demographic data available on the survey, of course, because that's where we asked the largest number of questions. And 74% of the people who took our survey identified as female, 21% of them as male, and 4% of them as non-binary or gender diverse. So in some ways you could say that this was a comprehensive piece of research into young women's perspectives on what youth wellbeing looks like. 79% of those people were Pākehā, 14% were Maori, 7% Asian, 4% Pacifica, 1% African, 1% Middle Eastern, 1% Latin American, 8% other, which included Aboriginal, American, Fijian, Indian, Scottish. So still a lot of work to do to make sure we're hearing from more young people of colour and more young males, but for the purposes of today, I think that this is a good piece of research for me to be able to share with you. The good thing as well is that because it was an online survey, it was across time and space, which means that we were able to reach people from all around the country. This research is actually available on our website as well if you want to read it in depth. But from the analysis that we did, there were 9 broad themes that came to the top that we heard from young people. And the first theme won't surprise anyone here. It's that young people want better, more accessible mental health services, education and support specifically for young people. This came up time and time again in every single one of the ways that we gathered insights from the young people we spoke to. Many of the young people we engaged with believe that mental health services need more funding, and as News Hub reported today, young people are having to wait a week, sometimes a month, to get access to the mental health support that they need, and that's just not good enough in a time of crisis. Young people we spoke to also believe that mental health workers should be well trained. There are a few gender diverse and rainbow young people who we spoke to who have had incidences where people have misgendered them, or actually also young people of colour who had the experience of trying to explain racism to their microaggressions to their counsellor. These are the sorts of things that shouldn't be happening and can often turn people away from getting those services. So mental health workers need to be really well trained in different sexualities and cultures. People also spoke about their desire for safe and non-judgmental spaces just to explore themselves and their identity. I think that young people have grown up in the age of the individual. We definitely, over the last 30 years, have had a push towards individualism away from whānau, hapu, collective sort of ways of thinking and going about things. But despite that, we heard time and time again from young people the desire for more spaces to connect in real life with one another, both with people their own ages, but also with people across the different generations as well. Related to this, the second theme that came up most frequently was that young people highlighted economic insecurity as a core reason for their stress. They named student debt, unaffordable housing, insecure, low-paid work, and many of them described their desire for a kinder, fairer economy for all of us. In the survey, young people were asked to choose from a list of 18 different worries or concerns, and we lifted those worries and concerns from a previous Ministry of Youth Development survey that they had done, and 44% of people chose lack of money and not enough money to pay the bills as one of their major concerns, so almost half of the young people we heard from. When you break that down into the demographic analysis, 50% of the survey respondents who identified as Maori chose this as a number one concern. 43% of those who are Pacifica identified it as a concern, and that's compared with 37% of Pākehā who identified this as a concern. So we know for sure that net wealth differs across ethnic groups. In 2015, the Stats New Zealand analysis says that the median Pākehā had an individual net worth of $114,000 compared with a Maori person who has $23,000 or a Pacifica person who has $12,000. However, we also know that in 2015, people aged 15 to 24 had the lowest amount of wealth than any other demographic in the country. Most had about $1,000 accumulated, but many have tens of thousands of dollars in student debt. But what I think we can ascertain from the similarity in responses, because actually 37, 44, and 50 is all quite high, is that as a class or a cohort, young people across the board, regardless of their ethnicity, are feeling the strain of an economic system that hasn't been kind to them. The young people we spoke with spoke about their love of Aotearoa New Zealand's nature. They spoke often of the love of the rivers and the beaches and the forests and the lakes, which is actually something that I think if you spoke to any New Zealander, regardless of their age, they would say something about that. It's really core to our identity. But related to that, young people also talked about the stress that they feel about worrying about things like climate change. Young people have been told quite often, you are the generation to save it, but also, why are you so apathetic and not voting? And like those messages in their heads is just like, which one is it? One quote that stuck in my mind was a 12-year-old girl that we interviewed in one of the workshops, and she said, I'm really worried about our survival because of climate change. And I just think at 12, you shouldn't be worried about those sorts of things. Almost half of the young people we surveyed chose body image as one of their biggest concerns. That was chosen, I mentioned the 18 concerns and worries that people had to choose from. Number one was succeeding in studies and getting good grades. Number two was body image. And that was above like making sure that my family is healthy and well and things. So it's a very serious concern, and I think we should be worried about that. And that was across the demographics, 12 to 24. And it was also across the different ethnic groups as well. This isn't to say, 82% of the respondents who chose body image as an issue were female. That's not to say that it only affects young females, it's just to say that females were overrepresented in our research, and I think if we did something with young males, it would probably be the same. The young people we engaged want to see an end to oppression of all kinds. In the open field text questions, 600 young people mentioned some form of oppression that they wanted to see an end to. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. Specifically, a lot of the comments were about the need for government and institutions, schools, universities, health providers to dismantle systems of oppression. And that I think speaks to the need for well-trained mental health counsellors or teachers who are fluent in the idea of gender and sexual fluidity in different cultures. Young people we spoke to value accessible and affordable education, but they do worry that not being equipped for the life skills and knowledge that they need for the 21st century. This came up a lot in the conversations we had in the workshops at Festival for the Future particularly. So one thing to bear in mind is that it was young people that have turned up to an event that's about social enterprise and business and things like that. So many of them spoke about, I don't think I'm getting the tools I need to deal with the gig economy and the future of work and things like that. So very literate, very onto it young people. The teacher we interviewed was concerned about the lack of sexuality, healthy relationships and consent education in schools, though I do give credit to the government for rolling out mates and dates to all secondary schools now. I think that's really, really awesome, and ActionStation was very proud to support Lauren and Ruby, who were the high school students who delivered that petition to Parliament last year. The other theme was young people need more great role models in their community, on TV and in positions of power and leadership. Survey respondents were asked to identify how strongly they agreed with a bunch of statements, 0 being don't agree at all and 5 being I totally agree with that. And when given the statement, I see people that look like me in positions of power, e.g. politicians, principals, professors, the average answer chosen by 1,043 young people was 2.78. So very low, and it was, in short, I won't give you the figures because you can read it in the research, but in short, if most young people don't see people in positions of power that look like them, but it's worse if you're gender diverse, Maori, Pacifica or Asian. I would also like to say I've done some further research on this since, and at the moment in Parliament I think it's only 2 of the 120 MPs who are currently under the age of 30, and in local councils it's less than 1% of the councillors that are under the age of 30, and so there's definitely work to be done to increase representation. Young people should be taught about how to go about making change in their community and country, and people in positions of power need to get better at being responsive and listening to that. Of the 12 statements that we gave to young people, the one that ranked the lowest was the statement, I know how to go about making change in my community. And I think on this day that we're thinking about Suffrage 125 and the fact that we may have the vote, but that doesn't mean we know how to change things we don't like in between the times when we're voting. Sorry. I wanted to share with you the vision that we collated based on all of these themes that we heard from young people, to kind of lift it up a bit because it was a lot of sad stuff. But this is the vision that we put back to young people and said, this is what we heard from you, do you agree with it? And they said yes. So we want an Aotearoa New Zealand that is clean, green and beautiful. We believe New Zealand should be a country that values diversity, kindness, inclusivity and looking after one another. A country that nurtures life and nature and takes action on climate change. We believe every person should have access to great mental health services, affordable, accessible and excellent education, secure, fulfilling work with supportive colleagues and employers, and warm, comfortable, secure housing. Our economic system should be fair. Everyone should have enough money to flourish. People should be able to spend time, quality time with their friends and whānau and quality time in nature. We should have well-resourced community spaces where we can connect together across generations into people our own age, places where we can just have fun. We like that New Zealand does not have guns, snakes, high levels of crime or war, but we do want an end to racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia, xenophobia and homophobia. I forgot to mention that, but snakes and guns, like when in the question, what do you like most about New Zealand? No snakes, no guns, no war came up so much. I agree, I share those. We believe young people should be supported to explore their identity, gain a sense of belonging and purpose without feeling pressured. We should learn about other cultures, sexualities and gender identities as a way to build understanding. We want great role models. We want authentic and consistent people in our lives that encourage us to believe in ourselves and to love our bodies. We want to be taught life skills that will help us succeed in the 21st century, participate as citizens, engage in healthy relationships, and also learn about and reconcile with our historic past. We need people, processes and systems that support our mental, physical, spiritual, economic, cultural and social well-being. And I also just want to put an underline under the culture well-being there, because I noticed that that's not something currently being considered in the well-being budget as a metric, and I think it's really important. When our tamaiti, children, and our, last part, we ask those in power, with those with power to make this vision a reality to please do so. So thank you very much for having me today.
Laura, your research is astonishing and amazing. I'm going to go to the website and dive into it. Thank you so much for bringing that here today. Really appreciate that. I'd like to ask Bernadette Pereira to come to the podium, please.
E nā manga e ngā reo, nā mihi nui te a koutou, wahine toa, nā mihi te aroha ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tāla whalawa mā lolso I fua maumalangi mā. Ki o rana koutou katoa toa poto, ni sambula, malo elelei, and warm, I guess, what's today? Wednesday, Women's Celebration Day to all of you from the heartbeat of this land of Aotearoa up in Auckland. You know, I want to begin by really, it was when Louisa asked me to come, and I had to think about it several days, because I'm thinking, State of the Nation, only the Prime Minister or the head of state or those people give State of the Nation statements. And then I also thought, you know, it's really interesting that part of the tenets of the celebration of 125 years since women had the vote, it's about inclusivity. It's about making sure that everybody else has access. So it's about accessibility. So when I was thinking, Louisa, can you fund me to come there? Because really, which brings me to the next point, is I wanted to let you know about the organization that I proudly represent, and that is P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A Women. And P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A, just to do a little blurb about P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A right now, P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A Women has been in existence for 43 years. So, you know, we're not yet 100 years, but we will be there. And for 43 years, when the first migration came from Samoa, Tonga, and of course we had our relatives from the Cook Islands, from Tokelau, You know the migration story of the Pacifica people. This was in the 50s and the 60s. So all these families were migrating here to New Zealand. Unlike the programs that's now on offer for new migrants that have come from other parts of the world, there were no such thing as ready assistance and services provided for the Pacific earlier migrants. And so hence, it was the women of the Pacifica that got together and made it happen and made the lives of those earlier migrants and their families livable during those earlier times here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I just thought I'd throw that into context. So we are celebrating today 125 years since the woman got the vote. I guess the question then that we should also be asking, so how far or how much more do we need to go in order to get basic things, the human rights of women, also the pay equity that we've been talking about, and opportunities for women to participate just on the same level as the men in this country. So I thought it's important to put that into context because, you see, I picked this up on my way here, and there is some wonderful women who have done well and have been honored during this time. So I want to take the opportunity now. If you look in there, there's about, I think I made a count. I thought, I was going to claim some of our sisters from, from Asia, because I thought, they look like a new one, or, just so that I can increase the numbers. So sadly, I looked again. There were a mere six of our women in here, which brings me to the next point. The recording of the successes of Pacifica women in the mainstream arena is a lot to answer for. We're still not on this, in the forefront because we're small news. It's not important. So I'm not going to touch on the stats because there's been a lot of stats being spewed out during this period about where women have been, what women are doing right now, and the aspirations of women in the younger generation, just as we've heard from the young girl going forward. But allow me to just ask you and challenge all of us in here, especially you. You know, Pacifica women, we always have to look at our sisters, the Maori women. Because if Maori women are up on that a bell curve, then slowly you can weed something and you might be able to see Pacific women. On the stats, that's why I don't like stats, because you know what? We don't feature well at all in these stats. But that tells a story, and that's the story that sometimes needs to be challenged, because the indicators that are used in order to collate those stats needs questioning. And who sits to make the decision in terms of developing indicators for anything that you research where Pacifica women are involved or included, then the mind boggles. So where are we? Where are we of Pacific women in terms of the celebration of 125? Well, you know what? I want to take a bit of time to really share with you some of our women that have trailblazed, that are our role models and trailblazers at this point in time here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So you all know Luamanwau, Dame Winnie Laban. She's here. In terms of the field of education, you know, Tangaloatele, Peggy Fairburn, she is now made the, I never can pronounce the word, emeritus professor. Emeritus. See, it means she's on top of her game, right? Right. So we're really proud. We're celebrating, and because there's so few, we need to hang on to them. There's also Salainoa Wilson, Dr. Melanie, Anai. We have also Jean Metare here in this wonderful city of Wellington. And we also have Dr. Litasi from, what's the institution down Porirua? she'll kill me if she knows that I forgot her. Dr. Litasi Fitireia. How can I forget Fitireia? And then even in the health sector, we have our pediatricians, like in Dr. Te Wheeler Percival. We have Dr. Florina Chan Mao. We have Dr. Jonathan Yelu, to name a few. And we also have Dr. Nua Tupai, who just won the gold medal for the outstanding services awarded by the RNZSP, or rather the Royal New Zealand College of GP, and the list goes on. And then if we were to focus on the sports, we have Fiao'o Fa'amausili, yay, Pietres Faumuina, we have Dame Valerie Adams, and we have Bernice Mene, come on Luisa, and Luisa. We claim Luisa because she's part of P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A. And then in the arts, oh, look, P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A does so well in that particular, because they're all authentic, they're talented, they're creative. And so we have some of our few from there. You've got Urale. Urale, she's a film producer. We've got, sorry, because my glasses, you forgot your page, I forgot my glasses. We have Paris Goebel. We have, Selena Selena Marsh, and who else? And then there are only 2 Pacific judges, and that is Judge Ida Malosi and Judge Moala. So do you think we have enough? Of course not. We don't even feature in terms of the percentage. And then we also, they told me I need to read this out so that you can know. Who else have I left out? I'm really sorry. And then last but by all means not least, here in this whale, or in this house, we have our politicians. We're so proud of Poto being are you the first woman assistant speaker of the house? First Pacific. Yeah, anyway, you're first woman. Yeah. We have two women in this current government's cabinet, and that is the Honourable Carmel Sepuloni and the Honourable Jenny Salisa. So can we... and of course we have our baby Anahila. And Anahila, you'll see her everywhere. You'll hear her, you'll see her on Facebook, and then you actually can see her in real person. So she's everywhere. So what I'm trying to say is the question because there's a lot of solutions. We tend to look to government, we look to institutions, we look to those apart from us. I guess the challenge for all of us is, what about you? What about me? What are we gonna do from here? Because changes don't happen overnight. As you can see, 125 years ago was when Kate Sheppard dreamt and had this great aspiration of having women get the first vote in the whole world. So what happened? Is it going to take another 125 years for us to make some changes, to make sure that there is equality, to make sure that there is better settings for our future young women that are coming through? So it's no, I think we've talked. There's been a lot of conversations and discussions about what is missing, the gaps that are there. So I think the time is now come for the next 125 years. Well, I know some of you won't be around, including me, but it's for the future, as we have heard from our young girl. So what does it take? What does it take for you and me to make some of those changes right now? We can't leave it to the politicians only, or the institutions.
That was wonderful, Bernadette, a real challenge you've thrown to all of us, which we will pick up and I'm sure go forward. I'd now like to invite Farida Sultana to come to the podium. Thanks.
lot of what I want to say already you repeated, because we are third in the struggle, Maori women, Pacific women, then migrant women. And I like to acknowledge all our sisters whose struggle we all could be here today, not outside, as we saw the sign, the women should go home. I acknowledge their dedication, and there was no internet, no iPhone, nothing. And women can really organize. And I think that's a lot to learn from there. And also I like to acknowledge all our speakers before us, before me today, and Shakti women in the audience. And I like to acknowledge our chairperson, unique woman from Afghanistan. Only few women could get to the Afghan court as a judge. She's one of them, to be with us today. I guess we all struggle in our own way. Also, I like to extend my acknowledgement to Shakti women around the country who is working hard today to take women and children out of violence. And because of their hundreds of voluntary hours and dedication and determination, I'm standing here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I acknowledge women before me, last 23 years, who worked tirelessly to build the organization. If I say organization, I might limit myself. I think this is a movement that went beyond any organizational structure. I acknowledge all our sisters and organizations around New Zealand who supported us. Earlier in my journey, I think 1995, toward the end of 1995, I met few women who changed my life. Amakura Panaho from the P.A.C.I.F.I.C.A movement, Kich Kadbar, Betty Kadbar, Kich Kadbar mother-in-law, who is great-grandniece of Kit Sheppard. She talked a lot about the women's movement to our English as a second language class and the women in the migrant and refugee women within the organization. I remember 20th anniversary when we invited Betty Kadbar. She said, I will come. And I thought myself, she's in a wheelchair. Is that going to be okay for her health-wise? I asked Beverly Turner from Pacific Women's Watch, would you bring her? I just feel nervous for her to come here alone. She came, she attended the whole afternoon of celebration, and she went off and she told me she's so proud of us that we found our feet. And I think she's absolutely right. We found our feet within the movement, a movement of Maori women, Pacific women, and that then movement of migrant and refugee women. I've been here less than 25 years, exactly it's 24 years. My struggle in New Zealand is 24 years. So do a lot of our women who just arrived last month or who came before me. I think I saw a lot of changes in 4 years. When I arrived in this country, there was hardly any women in New Zealand Parliament who were from migrant and refugee community. I acknowledge Penzi Wang. She is, in a way, saying climb the hill. She arrived, and if we look at now, we have number of women in New Zealand Parliament who are from migrant and refugee background. 25 years back, you could really count in your hand how many women, migrant and refugee background who are in, especially from Asia, Africa, Middle Eastern countries, who are in senior position. You could really count in your hand. But now it changed. And I am proud to say that I am part of that change, and I believed every day when I wake up that it will change. It will be a better place for migrant and refugee women to live in New Zealand. But moving forward, the change that we saw, but I think moving forward, it is very important for us to acknowledge the struggle we went through last 24 years. We don't want our young women to go through that. Change that we want to bring in New Zealand as a society. And I need to acknowledge our youth unit, the work they are determined to do in the school, in the university, that any young women from Asia, Africa, and Middle East who grow up in New Zealand should grow up being proud who they are with their identity. Because that's really important if New Zealand is going to move forward, because they're the next generation of New Zealand. I guess acknowledgement goes to Mengju as a leader of the youth unit who leads the movement around the country. I also like to take you back because we still have a long way to go. We don't want to leave any women behind. Women from refugee and migrant community go through a lot of challenges. Gender discrimination, patriarchal society, religious oppression, we didn't leave behind. We brought all with us. I wish that we lived behind. We could start a fresh year, but we didn't leave behind. And the struggle that women still face, thousands of them around the country, basic thing like able to speak English, basic thing, understanding of human rights they can exercise in this country, basic thing like they have a choice and they could exercise that choice is not there. Lack of integration, they are very vulnerable and they are prone to be abused and discriminated. And some of us who come outside the boundary and try to make a change, we face institutional discrimination. We face a discrimination that we don't belong here. And I guess that echoes our sisters who spoke, Maori sisters and Pacific sisters. I'm not the first brown woman standing here and saying that we faced institutional discrimination. That means for us is two layers of it. As a migrant and refugee woman from Asia, Africa, Middle East, we want to move forward. And we have to take everyone with us, because if we don't take everyone with us, that's not the society. If we leave women behind, then we are not really progressing. If we think about, if we don't want to leave women behind, it doesn't matter if small changes or they make it a bigger changes, but they need to make a change in their life, then we can all move forward. In this process, organizations like Shakti, who out there openly talk about feminist perspective, and I don't know how much you would really understand how difficult it is. Because in patriarchal society, it doesn't matter you live in New Zealand or live wherever, if you talk about feminist perspective, it is really, really hard. This hard journey, as I said, hundreds of hours of voluntary work, but we still don't see a pay equity. We don't believe we've been fairly treated by, doesn't matter now government or government before. But we can't stop. We have to continue. We have to move forward because we have next generation that we need to make a difference. And last, not the least, if we talk about, are we there yet? I want to take things internationally because, as you know, we all come from another country, another land. And internationally, this is the worst time. I'm in my 50s, I could think about it. If you look at Europe now, refugee women and refugee crisis is huge. The amount of discrimination refugee women face in Europe is undescribable. I can't believe in this century, country could have a law, if you support a refugee, you go to jail. And then we talk about it. These women are not refugee women. I refuse to say they're refugee women. They're a woman they got displaced because of the war. If war wasn't there, they wouldn't be there. They would be in their homeland. They would be in their neighborhood. They would be in their place where they were. But because of war, they've been displaced. And in the war, The majority of them lost their husband or brother or family. They have next to nothing to live with. Women being raped, tortured. And I think when we talk about this in Europe and we talk about us, New Zealand, a small country drop in the Pacific Ocean, but suffrage women leadership, actually global, is not just New Zealand. These women in New Zealand actually created a change globally. We can't say, we are a small country in New Zealand, we can't do much. But I think we can do what we can do and still make a difference. And New Zealand can still lead. I think as a country, we believe in human rights. And I think we can advocate for human rights. We can advocate for refugee women in crisis, even though we can't make a bigger change, but we can still advocate. We can also advocate for the change and stop the war. And I'm requesting everyone, that could be something we can do globally, because these women showed us making a change in New Zealand also contribute the change globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Farida. Another really powerful perspective. I have nothing but admiration for the work Shakti does. Finally, I'd like to ask Helen Swales, please, to come to the podium.
Kia ora tātou, and I do need to remember that we were reminded that Louisa would like some Q&A time, so I am aware of the Okay. All right, so I stand here and I feel really privileged that both Commonwealth women, Louisa Wall and Jo Hayes, have invited us, a collective of women, who would probably stand in front of you and say we're not leaders. But for some unknown reason, people have chosen to follow us and have recognised that we are and have elevated us. But I would say that if you would ask any one of us, it's not a position that we actually seeked. It is one that has been bestowed upon us. So thank you very much for hosting this hui today on this auspicious occasion of recognising 125 years. So as an Indigenous woman standing in front of you, I was brought up from my time period that Indigenous woman was not something on my radar. I was brought up to be a Pākehā. So I come from a family of really strong women. My mum was the nurturer and also the warrior. So a little bit of that story is that she came from a family of 13. She had 11 brothers and she was one of 2 sisters. She had 3 husbands and 2 of them were abusive in relationship, and her brothers feed her and showed them the door. So the third person who came along in her life was the father that we have today, who is amazing. So we've seen a lot of abuse, which is in the stats that we as Maori women carry even today. So I can stand here and say that nothing has changed in that time. We are still talking about that same story. So that hasn't changed for us. I can also talk about other things, and one of the statistics that I find very scary is that I've got till 77 and then I expire. That's a statistic I'm not looking forward to, one that I'm closer to than at the other end. Also, one of the other things is, in my life, I decided that you needed to walk through a door where you sat at a table and made a decision, a collective decision, but you needed a critical mass. So I'm standing here as a 3rd term local politician, and I am only one of 3 around that table. And I know from experience in my 3rd term that you need 1 to put a motion on the table, you need a 2nd to actually affirm it and put it, and you need a 3rd to start that conversation. And I think in this whare that we're here today, the women that sit in here can actually affirm that that is actually the way it is, that we need to have that critical mass if we're going to move that paradigm and make effective change. It's a legacy that Kate Sheppard and all of our women that have gone before us have actually tried to give us to this day, the ability to effect change. So when I pondered the question or the statement, where are women in New Zealand today? Well, I thought, what has changed for us? And I had to actually really look at that. And I couldn't really think of anything that had moved dramatically for us today. We are still talking about the same issues that we talked about 125 years ago. Violence is still something there. The day on the 28th of November, when we decided to go and cast our vote, there was still fear as women. How were we going to be received because we were closeted in the house? For some of our women here, our visitors who have decided that this is going to be their country, their chosen country to be here, will know that in this country they have an oyster that is theirs should they claim it. But then we need to take the responsibility that we are inclusive. We give and we take away with one hand and take away with the other. So with all of those things, I stand here as the National President of Business and Professional Women because once again, I wanted the voice of civil society, like the National Council of Women, to actually try and affect some of these changes or these promises or these foundations that have been laid before us. That we've actually, it's not that we've squandered, but we need to educate the other half of us, the yin or the yang, that we actually have a place at that table with them, and that together with that conversation, we need to say or demand, but in a way that they hear us. We don't scream, we ask, right? Then they hear us in our gentle way of nurturing, that we want to have our voice heard and that we need them to help us change because alone we can't do that. And is it when I hear that this amazing survey that did with young people and I look at their promise that these young people have, what happens when they grow up? Where do they lose that vision? What do we do or what does society do that makes them change? That promise that they want us to take on board and hear. What happens in that in-between? I don't know. But I want to hear that story, that in-between, that missing link. Because I've put myself in a position where on local government I hope to affect some change. And I also hope to affect some change as being part of an organisation that looks globally at all of the issues that affect women. That we look at trying to activate some of those international treaties that are there, that if they are not happening locally, that they have recommendations or consequences that come back to this country, and we need to be the watchguards collaboratively. We need to stand together and not let us be divided, but we need to stand together and say, you need to hear us. So, what I would like to do is finish with this really amazing couple of statements. So, behind me is infinite power, and we know that. Before me is endless possibilities, and we've heard that. Around me is boundless opportunities. Please, I ask you to walk in a collective way, that we take the opportunity to use those boundless opportunities in front of us and affect change. So to our hosts, thank you very, very much for pulling us together. It has been a huge privilege to be here with these other amazing women and to actually come and just give you a brief indication that, I'm sorry, nothing has changed.
Well, ladies, each and every one of you have blown me away. I don't know what I was expecting. I thought I was going to hear stats about police call-outs for family violence, blah, blah. But what I got has been an absolute treat. I got personal, powerful stories, drawing from the past, drawing to the present, looking to the future. And it's been a real treat. I wasn't expecting that, so thank you so much, each and every one of you. Now I want to open up for questions, and we'll probably have about 15 minutes of questions, and then we'll get Louisa to close. So, by the way, the ceiling has microphones, so you don't need a handheld microphone. You should be heard quite easily. Well, I've got a quick question. I listened to one of the 125 debates earlier in the year in the lead-up, and the question I thought was a really good one. What do you think have been the pivotal policies or events in the last 125 years that have occurred that have provided momentum to where we are today, and what do we need to do? If you had a magic wand, what was the one thing you'd do today to change something, whatever that might be? Just whoever would like to answer that. I think you've got handheld microphones you can use. Oh, great, you go, Laura. You're great.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. The reason I have an answer for this is because I'm doing a TED Talk in a couple of weeks, which now that you've said that, I'm like, oh, I should have said no. In Christchurch, though, not the Wellington one. So maybe they're nicer. I don't know. But yeah. But and basically, my TED Talk is asking people to imagine that it was because it's on my birthday, my 30th birthday, and I'm asking people to imagine that it was the year that I was born, and I'm 30, and I'm an activist, and I'm in a relationship with a woman, which is all true. But then. That would have been just when homosexual law reform passed, and it was never illegal for women to have sex with women. But I am of the view that as long as it's illegal for any person of any sex to have sex with someone, whoever they want, as long as it's consensual and above age, blah, 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 then none of us are free. And so I'll be talking in my TED Talk about how on that measure, my life today is so much better than it would have been for me born or to be the same person that I am but 30 years ago. And I think that the battle for human rights to be recognised in that space right now is about sexual and gender fluidity and the recognition of trans women, because that we talked about the patriarchy quite a bit here today, and patriarchy came here to New Zealand, I think, in a lot of ways with colonisation and Christianity, and prior to that we had lots of different genders under the banner of Takatapui. There were about 6 different genders, I think it is, and so any act of recognising transgender people's rights as human rights is an act of decolonisation and a stand against patriarchy, in my opinion. So.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else like to take that question? Yep, go for it. Natalia?
My speech was way more polished than that, by the way. I just want to apologise because it did round up quite nicely at the end, but then I forgot my page. Anyway, that's a very big question in terms of history knowledge, which I don't have in my brain, but I agree with Laura. I was here in New Zealand when that happened, and it was very emotional. The thing in terms of what to do, which I left out of my speech in that page that's sitting in the printer, from an immigrant woman, brown women of color perspective, the one thing I was going to ask people to take away as a reflection was if you do meet a woman of color, especially from a point of view from where I'm coming from, which is immigrant women from Latin America, Southeast Asia, Middle East, or Africa, which is a massive chunk of the rest of the world, you do ask, if you feel so inclined, to ask them what their story is, where they're from and why they're in New Zealand. That's like one initial, quick, individual act that can make a massive impact in this woman's life. If you feel so inclined to take it a little bit further, so there's like phases to individual acts that you can do. You don't need to go all out and do 1,000 things, but one phase is that one. The second phase would be inviting them for coffee or trying to build a relationship of mentorship in a kind way, not in a patronizing way, like in a really genuine way of saying, hey, I've been here my whole life. I could probably answer a couple of your questions, that we will have this parallel universe in our brain of lack of understanding culturally and nuances that limit us and professionally and personally. And the only thing I just wanted to add is the impact that we'll have in this woman's mental and health well-being will be massive. So don't underestimate the role you might have in someone's life from a local's perspective in the immigrant space, which is the space I can speak to a bit more confidently to.
Thank you, Natalia. It's wonderful advice that we can all do. So easy. It's not hard. Cup of tea. Have a chat. Any questions from anyone in the audience? Yes, we have one.
My name is Kurji, and I'm privileged is based on two words. One is equity and discrimination. So not-for-profit organizations are an extension of government services, and a lot of our organizations are providing services to where the rubber really hits the road. You also know, and I don't have statistics on this, that a large number of people in the not-for-profit sector are actually women working for the not-for-profit sector. I also know, and I know from my experience in Shakti and other not-for-profits, that the pay that not-for-profit employees get is the other sectors. Often we ask our people to work more, give of themselves, and they do, not because they have to, but a lot of us are passionate enough to work in this sector. But we are talking about equity of, pay equity for gender. How do we discuss this issue of pay equity between the public, private, and NGO sector? Because I think each of these sectors actually contribute to the social issues we have in this country. So it's a question I am asking myself, and I'm asking all of you, that what can we do holistically, and what can we do little bits to change this?
Did you want to say? I want to respond to that because and also sort of share that I work for one of the largest male prisons here in the country. And the question, because I totally tautoko what you're saying in terms of the disparities and in terms of the discrimination in pay, how much is paid to the third sector or the NGO sector and those that work in government and business. The government, the last government, and I think to some degree this current government as well, you're talking about how could we reduce the percentage of recidivism amongst people, amongst men, but particularly with a view to Maori men in the prisons incarcerated. And governments in and governments out always talk about the partnership, between what government is offering and that of NGOs. And then they talk about rehabilitation and reintegration of the men back. I long saw from our work that there is a major, I think, unfairness when you divvy, because governments give a lot more money to the running and the maintenance of prisons. And very little, if any, to the rehabilitation and the reintegration of those people back in society. There's an imbalance there. I know they just had the Justice conference. I couldn't make it, but suffice to say, when government says here, it's almost like you just dump it to the NGO sector, they will pick it up without the resources to support the work that really begins. When you're talking about rehabilitation and reintegration of people back into society, then you really got to put your money where where your mouth is, excuse the expression, because they release the men and expect the community, those services, to pick it up, but they don't provide the services, the money to supporting. I reckon it should be the other way around. It should be $1 for $1. You pay $1 to keep the men inside, and you pay $1 to the community that is going to rehabilitate and integrate the people back in. So I don't know if I've answered you, but I think it's the spirit that I see where you're coming from.
Can I also just add to that to say, I think the fact about NGOs is that there is a reliance on the voluntary aspect of our organisations, and that comes in terms of those services that we're sometimes contracted for, and the expectation is that we know where that our members and those people who are involved with us are going to go the extra yard to do what we need to do, regardless of getting the money. And I think there is a reliance on that that's incredibly unfair to the NGO sector in terms of the contracts or the funds, or even the experience that people get within our organisations that then get taken into government departments or agencies or whatever on much higher salaries than the organisation can ever pay, and because we're working within a smaller envelope in terms of the funds and the pūtea that are there. And it's become something that's embedded for years in terms of, I mean, if we look at it with the League, we have very, very small contracts, but we deliver beyond whatever that contract is, because we're going to do that, because we're doing it for our own. And I think the reliance on that and the inability, you know, people talk about the public-private partnerships. They don't actually include, I believe, NGOs in that when they're talking about that.
Could I just comment there, because we've talked a lot, many of us, around issues around domestic and sexual violence in particular. And I think the challenge is that we need change at an individual level, at a whānau and family level, and we need systemic change that is driven by policy and funding and proper planning and data and measurement. And we need each one of us, and many of us are, but we can spread the ripple, to bring up our children in ways that are equal. And some people would say that we've managed to get our daughters to behave more like men, but we have failed to get our sons to behave more like women. So can we enable boys from the time they are tiny to be empathetic, to be vulnerable, to express emotion, not lock them into a box, a stereotype that requires them to be strong, to be providers, to be powerful, that they own the power? Can we find a way to help to change those stereotypes and ask ourselves in our homes and in our workplaces, what does a truly gender equal household look like? What does a truly gender equal workplace look like? What is a truly gender equal? And let's go beyond that, obviously, to all of the other inequalities we've touched on. And then secondly, the UN's report on New Zealand's progress over the last 5 years, as many of you in this room know, is a damning one. We cannot allow it not to be addressed. It needs a plan. The plan needs to be resourced. It needs goals which include the issues that have been talked about, whether it's pay disparity, violence, health, mental health issues. Remembering that, of course, we need men just as the suffragettes needed men to get their message across. 8 men kill themselves every week in this country. That's hugely wrong. We want equality across all genders, including those we've talked about. And unless we work at both levels, the individual and the collective, and at the national level, we are going to be sitting here saying the same thing again. So let's paint a vision of the future. Let's go there. Let's encourage others to follow it. And change will happen. But we can't walk away doing nothing.
And part of that vision will be Laura's vision that she brought together from those voices from young people. Thank you so much. Any more questions? Yes, one at the back.
I think that for many of the wicked problems that we face, the solutions are systemic. But individually, we have the power to start shifting the narratives which enable the shifts in political conditions to enable those systemic solutions to come about. So very specifically, I'm talking about the fact that if we truly want to end sexual harm in our country, then we need a fully funded sexual violence prevention, treatment and support sector. But it has been partially funded forever, which means that built into the model, they have to fundraise in order to deliver their services. And I don't think that victims and survivors of sexual harm should have to fundraise to deliver their services. But the only way that we're ever going to get enough money coming into government to do that is if government gets brave enough to tax land, wealth and capital in order to raise the funds to do that. But the only way that's going to happen is if all of us start talking to people about the need for us to have policies where we tax land, wealth and capital, so that we can drown out the lobby groups who are always going to be pushing that agenda because it's in their interest. So as an individual, we can shift the narrative because we have to, because they have money, but we've got numbers. But ultimately, the solutions are systemic. That's my personal perspective.
I just want to tell a story, if I may. You know, Helen in her corridor, she says, after you've given all these stats about your survey, and she would say, what is it, what happens, what changes the young men or young people when they get to a certain level? What change, where is it? Where is the change happening in terms of suddenly it's negative reaction or negative thoughts that they take on board? And then also the question that was raised, you know, you've got to start, I'm a firm believer that we start with your household, with our households. And I did that. I've only got one son. And I longed when he was born, and I said, you're going to be a sensitized baby. And you know what I did? I used to dress him in pink to the horror of my poor dad when he saw. He had pink trousers, he had pink T-shirts, because pink is such a lovely color anyway. I love it. And I would take him to all my commitments, and he'll be sitting there playing. So all of the people that he grew up with, all my friends, that he said one day, he says, Mom, I'm the only one in the class that had so many aunties, because everybody was an auntie to him. So I think we begin with that. I mean, it's very basic, but I believe that if all of us here start, you know, sensitizing our young men from an early age, yeah, I think the world will change. The changes that we're talking about, it has to happen, but it will happen.
Thank you, Bernadette. I think we'll call that a close now. So it gives Lewis a chance just to sum up and thank the panellists. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sharing your stories today. I ask Lewis to come up to the podium. Just wondering about timing. I might sum up and we end on it, actually. Yeah. Yeah, where are our books? Just press that. Stop. When you're ready. Okay. Where's the box to say thank you? You want to bring them? Okay. Kia ora mai no tātou. Sorry about that. We've got some logistical challenges because we actually have a video to show you, which is part of an initiative called Give Kate a Voice. And it was an initiative that was funded by the Ministry for Women's Affairs. But we have a montage of women from the 1890s through to today. And I am one of them, I have to say. I haven't seen the video yet, but it includes Helen Clark, a young woman called Fatimata Bar, Teresa Gatting, and others who essentially have been empowered to tell our suffrage story based on Kate Sheppard's speeches. And so we will do that. The lovely Charlotte has got some wonderful books as gifts to our panellists. And in summing up what you all contributed, I think, actually, Helen, where you started, are we there yet? And the answer is hell no. And why aren't we there yet? Because if we're still grappling with violence and pay equity, and actually equity issues in terms of the funding,
because our governments successively have taken for granted our community capacity to love and care for each other. How can you not, as communities, care and love and care for those who you are part of? And I think when I look at a lot of the stories tonight, obviously it's about the status of all women, but what we discussed was the status of specific women and the layers of discrimination that exist for those specific women based on their histories of either colonisation, migrant journeys. I think for me, though, I was incredibly inspired, Laura, by the vision of our young people. I mean, what a document and a strategy to go forward. If we could implement that, then we would be the best place in the world for a child to be a child. I think the whole issue is about funding, government priorities versus community priorities, and obviously community priorities are based on need. Government priorities are based on theory and kind of, a script about how they're going to run this political term. Look, I'm a politician and I'm saying these things. But I do think, and I want to come back to the whole issue of suffrage and what we fought for, because our Parliament's 40% women. We've got a commitment for our public boards to be 50-50, and currently on our private boards it's 19%. But actually what we have to think about is what do those percentages actually mean in terms of women having power to make decisions. And that's actually what it's about, the power to distribute resources and prioritise, and the power to provide opportunities. And so if those are really important, then actually focusing on the percentages of women that have decision-making responsibilities, not only at central government level, but at local government level, actually within our institutions that have power, and I know Prue talked about our iwi organisations, but actually right across society, it's really important that women are in those decision-making powers. But one of the things I thought was you've all gone through AGMs, and I know, Gill, you've had your AGM just recently, which is your members, your individuals, bringing issues to the table that you, as the National Council of Women, then prioritise. I'm wondering how you will share your remits, what your members bring to the table, and have a kind of collective discussion, because we've got National Council of Women, Business Professional Women, Pacifica, the League, and you all have your own priorities, but actually, what are your shared priorities? And maybe what we can do is commit to bringing you together every year for you to then share with each other what your priorities are. We work out what the collective priorities are, and then we take them on board as CWP, because we've got an incredibly active now group of women who are working across the House, and a lot of what we're trying to do is find issues where we can collaborate on. We've tried to do family violence, we've tried to do pay equity. It hasn't worked, it's become too political. But the spaces that we have been able to collaborate on have been around violence, have been around some of our practices in our ethnic communities like FGM, human trafficking, prostitution, those types of issues that actually are highlighted in our CEDAW report. But the structural stuff, actually why we should be working together to build the capacity to support women from across all of our organisations to assume these positions of power on the boards. We've got the database for women's affairs, but I think there's a lot more that we can be doing as women to prepare ourselves for these decision-making positions. So that's my little contribution to your contribution. And I'm Jackie, lovely Jackie. We've got one for you too. So actually you come up and you can help me.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you as always. So that one's for you. And then I've got to push a little button and we can just see a... And then we'll push this little button, watch it, and is Kura still here or has he disappeared? He went. I'll have to do the karakia then. Right.
Is that all I have to do? All right, here we go.
Women are entitled to share in the privileges of citizenship. If we have to obey the law, we want a voice in the making of that law. If we pay taxes, we want a voice in saying how that tax money is spent. If we are interested in politics, we want full liberty of thought and action. In short, we want a voice in the form of that most sacred possession, a vote. Women, take the matter up.
It may seem we are putting ourselves in a position of antagonism towards the other sex. Nothing is further from our thoughts. Our strong conviction is that until a true and perfect equality is recognised between men and women, the highest happiness cannot exist. But this will never be accomplished while one sex assumes superiority and accords to the other tacitly, if not openly, inferiority. Women, take the matter up.
We are tired of having a sphere doled out to us and being told anything outside that sphere is unwomanly. We want to be natural, just for a change. We want to be treated as ordinary human beings, with feelings, thoughts, desires, and aspirations, all requiring opportunities for self-development. We must be ourselves at all risks. So let women learn, forever learn, forward, forever forward. Women, take the matter up.
Conventionality rules us with a rod of iron. The social ostracism endured by women who dare to step out of the ordinary ruts to earn an income amounts to cruelty. It also seems to have become an accepted axiom that a woman should be paid less for doing a thing than a man should. How manifestly unfair to have two rates of pay for the same work, merely because one of the workers is a woman. Women, take the matter up.
I quote one clause of the electoral bill in full. Person includes female. This infers that up to 1892, a woman wasn't a person in the eyes of the law, so she must have been a thing. Now things are possessed and owned, so naturally, those who found her useful as such oppose giving her the franchise. For the moment a thing ceases to be subservient, it ceases to be useful. Women, take the matter up.
Women's suffrage has undergone the treatment usually accorded to great reforms, those which appeal to the principles of justice and equity rather than to self-interest. We have encountered fierce opposition, gross misrepresentation, and despicable trickery. Ridicule and insult have been freely heaped upon women who dared to ask to be counted as citizens. We have suffered numerous defeats, but each battle loss has given us a larger army. Women, take the matter up.
The fundamental truth is that men and women are all members of one body. If one half is artificially cramped, the other half must suffer. But
When restrictions are removed, the action of each part will benefit all others. Break down the barriers that come between you and your right to stand inside of the law, equal in every way to your brother. Women, take the matter up.
The news is being flashed far and wide. Civic freedom has been granted to the women of New Zealand. Do not think that your single vote does not matter much. The rain that refreshes the parched earth is made up of single drops. For all that separates, whether of race, class, creed or sex, is inhuman and must be overcome. Women, take the matter up.
Well, I thought rather than do a karakia, we could actually sing a waiata to end, which is ka waiata. But can I just acknowledge the Honourable Tolly is in the room. She is our Deputy Speaker, but she's also on the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union Bureau for Women, and she's assumed that role this year, and so she will have that tenure for this term. And I want to acknowledge my Portal Williams, who's an Assistant Speaker, but she's also been hugely involved in CTA-CWP and was the Pacific rep and actually travelled to a lot of those international forums last year. And actually, as I said before, it's a team effort in CWP. We do everything together. So finally, I just want to thank you all for taking your time and spending it with us this afternoon. I think it's been incredibly valuable. Yep. I hope all of those that have participated have found it valuable too, but I've got a funny feeling this is going to be an annual event for us. And that there'll be a work program developed based on our CEDAW report. But that's how we do things. So for those of you who know ka waiata, can we all sing ka waiata? And that'll be our little karakia to leave us today. So I'm going to come down. Ka waiata.